The funeral flowers had only just begun to fade when the calls started. The scent of lilies lingered in the air, sharp and heavy, mixing with the silence that had wrapped itself around Ravenbrook. I stood in my kitchen on that Thursday morning, 2 weeks after we buried my Selene, staring at the steam curling from a navy ceramic mug that felt far too heavy in my hands. A Father's Day gift from my granddaughter Isolde years ago, it now seemed like it belonged to a stranger, a man I no longer recognized in the mirror. Everything did, the house, my voice, even my reflection. Grief had stripped the color from the world, leaving me to wander in the dull gray of absence. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from. The phone rang again, a relentless shrill that pulled me back from memories. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, before picking it up. "Dad, we need to talk about Ravenbrook," Gabriel's voice. He was 38, but the impatience that once drove him to beg for $20 as a teenager had only hardened with age. There was no warmth in his tone, just sharp calculation, as though he had already decided the fate of the house before I'd even had time to mourn its silence. I pressed the cracked mug to the table and breathed out slowly. "Good morning to you too, Gabriel." "Don't start with pleasantries," he cut me off, his voice cold, clipped. "The taxes, the upkeep, it isn't sustainable. You can't stay there alone." The words pierced deeper than he realized. Alone. Yes, I was alone. But did he think I hadn't noticed? Did he think I needed reminding that Selene's laugh no longer echoed through these walls? His urgency wasn't born from care. It was something else. Something greedy, something bitter. "You're worried about me?" I asked, my tone flat, daring him to say it. "We could put that money to real use. You know it. The longer you sit in that place, the more you waste." A silence followed, but I didn't fill it. Instead, I let the March wind rattle the old lilac bush outside the window. It leaned stubbornly against the fence, surviving storms year after year, and in that moment I wondered if it understood me better than my own son did. What Gabriel didn't know, and what I would not tell him, was that Selene had left me more than Ravenbrook. She had left me Stonehaven too, a house no one else knew existed, and as his voice tightened on the other end of the line, demanding answers, I felt a quiet defiance rise in my chest. Let him circle like a vulture. Let him assume. I had secrets sharper than his hunger, and for now, silence would be my shield. Gabriel's impatience only sharpened as the days passed. His calls came like clockwork, always circling back to the same subject, Ravenbrook. He spoke of taxes, of rising utility bills, of how dangerous it was for me to live alone in such a large place. But beneath those words, I could hear the truth thrumming in his voice like a drumbeat. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about what he thought he deserved. Every suggestion he made wasn't for my comfort, but for his own profit. "Dad, it's not just about you anymore," he told me one evening, his voice heavy with false concern. "Think about the family. Think about the future." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. How many years had I thought about the family? How many years had I sacrificed, worked double shifts, given up my own dreams so he could pursue his? The irony of hearing him invoke family now, like some sacred word, nearly made me laugh. I let him talk, listing figures and imagined burdens, while my eyes traced the worn wallpaper in the dining room. Selene had chosen it decades ago, pale cream with vines that curled like whispers. She used to sit beneath it, sipping tea, reminding me with her calm certainty that patience often outweighed force. I could almost hear her voice again. Protect what matters, even if it means silence. I did not tell Gabriel that Selene had left me Stonehaven, a house tucked away on the far edge of Eldermere, hidden even from him. I held that knowledge close, like a flame cupped against the wind. He would not wrest it from me. Not now. Not ever. When I stayed quiet, he grew sharper. "You can't cling to the past forever. Mom's gone. You don't need to keep living in a shrine. We can sell Ravenbrook, split the money, and use it for something useful." Useful! He said it as though the years of memories, the echoes of laughter, the nights of whispered promises between Selene and me meant nothing. To him, Ravenbrook was just a dollar sign waiting to be cashed. I shifted the phone to my other ear, my gaze drifting to the window. The March sky hung low, dark clouds rolling in like a warning. "I'll think about it," I said at last, my voice deliberately calm. He mistook my restraint for weakness, and I let him. What Gabriel couldn't see, what he would never understand until it was too late, was that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the wind howling outside, the empty chair beside me reminding me of Selene. I touched the envelope in the drawer, the one holding the deed to Stonehaven, and whispered a promise to her memory. I would wait. I would endure. And when the time was right, the truth would cut sharper than any of Gabriel's greedy words. The following days stretched into a blur of calls, visits, and whispers that seemed to follow me even when the house was quiet. Gabriel was not alone in his hunger. The others, distant cousins and family who barely knew me beyond my name, began circling too. They spoke in polite tones, asking if I was managing, if the house felt too big, but their eyes betrayed them. They weren't checking on me. They were measuring Ravenbrook like vultures eyeing a carcass, each waiting for their turn to feed. I watched it all in silence, though inside me a storm churned. My sacrifices replayed themselves in cruel detail. The years of labor, the nights I came home with my hands blistered, my back aching, yet still found the strength to read Gabriel a story before bed. The mornings I went without new shoes so he could walk into school proudly. The dreams I folded away, one by one, so his might take flight. All of it now reduced in his eyes to numbers on a ledger, assets to be stripped and sold. Isolde, my sweet granddaughter, was the only one untouched by the fever of greed. She would sit with me in the living room, her small hand resting on mine, her innocent questions cutting sharper than the accusations of adults. "Grandpa, why is Daddy always so angry about the house? Isn't it yours?" I would smile softly, brushing her hair back, but inside her words pierced deep. Even a child could see the truth. Nights grew heavier. One evening, a storm rolled across Ravenbrook. Thunder cracked against the sky, rattling the windows as I sat alone in the flickering light of a single lamp. The storm outside mirrored the one within me. I poured a drink, the glass trembling in my hand, and stared at Selene's photograph. Her eyes, captured forever in that frame, seemed to look directly into me. I remembered her last weeks, her frail hand gripping mine, her whisper urging me to be strong. And above all, I remembered the secret she left behind, the second house, Stonehaven. She had trusted me to protect it, to hold it back from greedy hands, and I would honor that trust. Gabriel came the next morning, striding through Ravenbrook like an inspector, his eyes sweeping the walls, the floorboards, the roof, as if the home of his childhood was nothing more than a property to be assessed. He commented on the peeling paint, the drafty windows, each flaw like ammunition in his campaign to dismantle my life. I watched him silently, sipping from the cracked mug Isolde had once given me, hiding my thoughts behind the steam. He could not see the strength gathering within me. The will was clear. Selene's love had left me more than Gabriel would ever know, and I, her husband, her keeper, would not let her gift be devoured by greed. Gabriel arrived again a few days later, this time unannounced. I heard his car crunch across the gravel drive before the knock came, sharp and impatient against the old oak door. I opened it to find him standing there in his tailored coat, briefcase in hand, his expression tight, as though even being here was an inconvenience. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes immediately sweeping across Ravenbrook with the cold detachment of an appraiser. He didn't see the house the way I did. To me, every corner held memory, Selene's laughter echoing in the kitchen as she tried a new recipe, Isolde's tiny footprints on the wooden floor, the smell of fresh pine on Christmas mornings long gone. To Gabriel, none of that existed. He walked through the rooms with clipped steps, his gaze falling on cracks in the plaster, scuffs on the banister, the slow drip from a faucet that had been leaking since winter. To him, these weren't memories. They were flaws, reasons to justify his plan. "Dad, this place is bleeding money," he said flatly, pausing in the living room. His voice carried no softness, only numbers and impatience. "Look at it. You shouldn't be here alone. It's too much for you." I carried a tray with 2 cups of tea into the room, setting it on the coffee table between us. "Sit. Have a cup. You used to love when your mother made it this way." He waved it off, irritation flickering across his face. "I don't have time for that. We need to be practical. You can't keep living in the past." I lowered myself into the armchair, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, though I didn't drink. His words stung, but I refused to let him see it. He spoke of practicality as though love, loyalty, and memory were foolish luxuries, as though all the years of sacrifice had evaporated into nothing more than debt and upkeep. I looked at him, my son, my blood, and for a moment I searched his face for the boy I once knew. The boy who had begged me to teach him how to ride his first bicycle, who had cried into my shoulder when he scraped his knee, who had once looked at me as though I were the strongest man alive. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man hardened by entitlement, his gaze cold, his words sharper than knives. He tapped the briefcase with his fingers, a rhythm of impatience. "You know this can't go on forever. If you won't make a decision, I'll have to." I said nothing. My silence filled the room heavier than any words could. Let him think I was weak. Let him underestimate me. He had no idea of the storm I carried in my chest, or of the secrets Selene had entrusted to me. For now, I would wait. Gabriel's visits became more frequent, each one more forceful than the last. He no longer bothered to cloak his intentions with feigned concern. He would stride into Ravenbrook with papers tucked beneath his arm, his jaw set tight, his tone clipped as if he were addressing a stubborn client rather than his own father. "Dad, this is madness," he said one evening, laying down documents across the dining table where Selene once served Sunday dinners. "The market is strong right now. If we sell Ravenbrook quickly, we could walk away with a decent sum, $500,000, maybe more. Think of what we could do with that money." The words stung, not because of their content, but because of the casual way he spoke them, as if the walls around us weren't soaked with decades of mom. Emery's, as if Selene's laughter hadn't once filled this very room. He leaned forward, tapping the figures on the page with the impatience of a man who had already decided. "You could move into something smaller," he pressed. "Something manageable. I could help set it up for you. You'd be more comfortable." Comfortable. The word curled bitter on my tongue. To him, comfortable meant stripped of dignity, exiled from the home I had built with Selene, reduced to a shadow haunting some sterile apartment while he carved up the pieces of my life for profit. I looked at him, my son, and wondered when exactly the shift had happened. When had the boy who once held my hand across busy streets become the man who now looked at me as though I were an obstacle to his fortune? I wanted to believe there was still love buried somewhere beneath that hardened exterior, but with every sentence he spoke, the hope grew dimmer. "You're not listening," I said quietly, folding the papers and sliding them back toward him. His eyes flared with irritation. "No, Dad, you're not listening. This house is too much. The taxes alone are eating away at everything. You can't keep this up forever. What happens if you fall? If you get sick? Who's going to take care of you then?" I held his gaze, steady, unblinking. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Gabriel." For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then he exhaled sharply, gathering the papers with a snap. "You're being stubborn. You always have been. But you can't keep clinging to something that's already gone. Mom's gone. This house, it's just bricks and wood now." His words cut deep, but I let them hang in the air without reply. Inside me, anger burned, but it was tempered by something sharper, a resolve that tightened like steel. Let him think me stubborn. Let him think me old and blind. He did not know of Stonehaven. He did not know of the secret Selene had left behind, and until the moment was right, he would remain in the dark. That night, as the echo of his car faded into the distance, I stood in the quiet halls of Ravenbrook, running my fingers along the walls that still whispered with Selene's memory. They were not just bricks and wood. They were my life, and I would not let them be stolen. That night, I sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound keeping me company. I poured myself a drink and stared at the envelope tucked safely inside the drawer, the one Selene had left for me before she passed. My fingers hovered over it, but I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to. I already knew what it held: the deed to Stonehaven, the secret house, the shield she had built to protect us, even after she was gone. Her voice came back to me in fragments, soft and steady, like the rhythm of her breathing in those final days. Protect what matters, even if it means silence. She had looked me in the eye when she said it, her hand cold in mine, her strength fading, but her conviction sharper than ever. I didn't understand the weight of her words then, not fully, but now, as Gabriel's greed pressed in around me, I did. The end. Next morning, Gabriel called again, his tone already edged with frustration. "Dad, we can't drag this out any longer. Do you realize how much we're losing every month? Taxes, upkeep, repairs. It's bleeding you dry. It's bleeding all of us dry." I let him speak, his voice a tide of numbers and impatience. When he finally stopped, waiting for my answer, I said only, "I'll think about it." He groaned. "You've been saying that for weeks." "And I'll keep saying it until I'm ready," I replied, my voice even. He muttered something under his breath before hanging up, and I sat there staring at the silent phone, my jaw set. He thought my silence was weakness. He thought my age had dulled me, made me pliable. But my silence was a weapon, one sharpened by years of sacrifice, years of patience, years of watching and waiting. Later that day, I walked through Ravenbrook, touching the walls Selene had once painted herself, running my hand along the banister Gabriel had slid down as a boy, listening to the faint creaks of the floorboards that had carried our lives. Every sound, every mark was a reminder of what we had built. To Gabriel, they were flaws, burdens, reasons to sell. To me, they were proof of a life well lived, and proof that what Selene and I shared could not be reduced to a price. The storm outside rattled the windows again, wind shrieking through the trees. I poured another drink and sat back, Selene's words echoing louder in my mind than the storm itself. Protect what matters. Silence was no longer just grief, it was strategy. And if Gabriel thought I would surrender, he was about to learn that some fathers carry storms inside them far greater than any their children can summon. The whispers became a meeting. Gabriel had arranged it, of course, summoning the family to Ravenbrook under the pretense of discussion. I knew what it really was, an ambush. By the time I walked into the living room, they were already seated, murmuring among themselves, their voices hushed but eager, like children waiting for sweets. Gabriel stood at the center, shoulders squared, his voice carrying the authority he believed was his birthright. "Dad can't keep living like this," he announced, gesturing around the room as though the walls themselves agreed with him. "The place is falling apart. The taxes are crushing. We have to think about the future." I sat down slowly in the armchair, the one Selene had claimed as hers for years, and folded my hands across my lap. I did not speak. I watched. One by one, they added their voices. A cousin suggested that selling would be practical. Another mentioned how the neighborhood had changed, how dangerous it might become. Words like responsibility and duty were thrown around, cloaked in the guise of concern, but dripping with greed. Each of them looked at Ravenbrook not as a home, but as a bank vault, waiting to be emptied. Through it all, Isolde sat on the floor by my chair, tracing her fingers across the edge of the rug. When the voices grew too loud, she looked up at me with wide, honest eyes. "Grandpa, why don't you just say no?" Her question cut through the noise like a blade. For a moment, silence filled the room. Their faces shifted, embarrassed, annoyed, unable to answer what a child had seen so clearly. I rested my hand on her shoulder, grateful for her presence, grateful that innocence still lived in at least one heart. Gabriel recovered quickly, his voice sharper now, trying to steer the moment back under his control. "Dad, this isn't about stubbornness. It's about what's best for everyone. You've had your time here. It's time to let go." I leaned back, studying him, remembering the boy he once was and seeing only the stranger he had become. Still, I said nothing. My silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. To them it looked like surrender. To me it was armor. With every word they spoke, they revealed themselves more clearly. They showed me their hunger, their impatience, their weakness, and I knew, when the time came, my silence would turn to thunder. That evening, after they left, I found myself alone again in the quiet of Ravenbrook. The house seemed to sigh around me, tired but unbroken, much like myself. I placed my hand on the drawer where Selene's secret still rested, and I whispered to her memory, "I won't fail you." Gabriel's tone grew harsher with each passing day, as though patience had finally slipped beyond his reach. He no longer called to ask, he called to demand. His words rattled down the phone line with the sharpness of someone who believed the outcome was already his to control. "Dad, we can't wait any longer. This has dragged on too much. The longer you sit in that house, the more it bleeds value. I'm not going to watch everything disappear just because you're too sentimental." I let him speak, his voice rising with every syllable, until the silence on my end swallowed him whole. When I finally responded, it was only with the same words I'd used before. "I'll think about it." I could almost hear the vein pulsing in his temple through the line. He hung up abruptly, leaving the echo of his frustration in the quiet kitchen. But it wasn't just Gabriel anymore. The neighbors had begun whispering too. A woman at the grocery store leaned close one afternoon, her eyes bright with curiosity. "I heard you're selling Ravenbrook. Such a shame, but I suppose it's too much for one man alone." I forced a thin smile and moved on, but her words followed me down every aisle. Someone had been talking. Gabriel, no doubt, spreading the news as though the sale were inevitable, as though he had already won. The weight of their assumptions pressed against me, but I refused to bend. I walked the halls of Ravenbrook that evening, touching the photographs that lined the walls. Isolde's first birthday, Selene's radiant smile on the day we moved in, Gabriel as a boy with wide, unguarded eyes. They were ghosts now, but they were mine, and I would not hand them over like trinkets at an auction. Gabriel arrived in person 2 days later, storming through the front door without waiting for me to invite him in. He dropped a folder onto the kitchen table, the pages fanning out across the wood. These are the listings. The agents are ready. All we need is your signature. His voice carried the certainty of a man who believed resistance was futile. I sat slowly, picking up one of the papers, scanning the neat lines of ink that reduced my life into columns of square footage and estimated value. My jaw tightened. "You've gone ahead without me." "I've gone ahead for you," he snapped. "You're not capable of making this decision anymore. Somebody has to." The words struck like a blade, but I didn't flinch. I placed the paper back on the table and folded my hands calmly. "If that's what you think, Gabriel." His eyes narrowed, suspicious of my composure, but he said nothing more. He gathered his things and left, convinced he had cornered me. When the door closed behind him, I opened the drawer and pulled out Selene's envelope. Stonehaven's deed lay inside, untouched, unspoken, and more powerful than any paper Gabriel could throw on my table. He thought he was winning. He had no idea he was already losing. The storm broke one evening when Gabriel returned with a folder thicker than before. He laid it down on the dining table with a thud, his face tight with triumph, as if he had already claimed victory. "These are the contracts," he said. "All that's missing is your signature. Once this is done, Dad, you won't have to worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything." I looked at the papers, the legal stamps, the bold signatures already scribbled by agents who didn't know me, who didn't care. It was all so neat, so final, as though I were just a formality standing in the way. My hands rested on the table, steady as stone. "You've prepared quite a lot for a decision I haven't made." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "You're dragging this out. It's irresponsible. You're not thinking clearly anymore. I'm trying to protect you from yourself. Protect me." The words burned, mocking every sacrifice I had ever made. Protect me? Where was his protection when I worked myself into exhaustion so he could go to school? Where was his protection when I emptied my pockets to pay his debts, to cover his mistakes, to keep his dignity intact? I clenched my teeth but forced my voice calm. "If you're so certain, why do you still need my signature?" His face flushed. "Because it's the law. But don't twist this into something it isn't. I'm doing what's best for everyone." I leaned back, my eyes narrowing. Everyone. He didn't even realize how much he revealed in that single word. Everyone meant himself, his plans, his ambitions. He wasn't saving me. He was saving his own hunger. That night, after he left the folder behind, I carried it upstairs and set it beside Selene's photograph. I opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope she had left me, the one that held the deed to Stonehaven. My hands trembled as I touched the paper, but not from weakness, from the weight of what it meant. Selene had known. She had seen what Gabriel might become, and she had prepared for it. I closed my eyes and remembered her voice, faint but unyielding in those final days. "Wait for the right moment. Let him reveal himself. Then you'll know what to do." I placed the envelope back into the drawer, my resolve hardening. Gabriel thought he was clever, thought he had cornered me, but ever. Each step he took revealed more of his greed, more of his arrogance, and with each reveal, the blade of truth I held grew sharper. When the storm outside rattled the windows, I sat in silence, the folder of contracts untouched beside me. Gabriel believed silence meant surrender. He would learn soon enough that silence was the beginning of his undoing. The breaking point came not in a heated argument, but in something far colder. I had risen early one morning to fetch the paper from the porch when I heard voices drifting from the driveway. Gabriel stood with a neighbor, his posture sharp, his tone dismissive. "He's old. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. Half the time he forgets what day it is. Once this sale goes through, he'll thank me for it." I froze in the shadow of the doorway, the paper crumpling in my grip. Forgetful? Senile? His words stung sharper than any demand he had thrown at me before. He wasn't just circling Ravenbrook now. He was circling me, stripping me down to weakness, to incompetence, so that when he took everything, no one would question it. I waited until the neighbor left, then stepped outside. Gabriel turned, startled, his face flickering with a smile too quick to be real. "Dad, I didn't see you there." "I saw you," I said quietly. He faltered, but only for a breath. Then he straightened, adopting the same confident mask. "I'm just trying to make sure people understand. This is for the best." I didn't answer. I let the silence sit heavy between us, and then I walked past him back into the house, leaving him standing there with his excuses. Inside, I placed the paper on the kitchen table and sat down. My hands were steady now. Anger had burned away the last traces of hesitation. Gabriel had declared war, not just on Ravenbrook, but on me. That evening he returned with more papers, his tone brisk, his words clipped. "Sign these, Dad. It's just a formality at this point. We can get this wrapped up within the week." I took the pen he offered, turning it slowly between my fingers. He leaned forward eagerly, his eyes bright with the arrogance of a man who believed victory was inevitable. I pressed the pen to the page, scrawled my name at the bottom of one of the lesser forms, an authorization for minor maintenance, and slid it back across the table. "There, you have something," I said calmly. His face lit with triumph, mistaking my act for surrender. He didn't realize that I had given him nothing of consequence, only enough to feed his illusion. He thought he was breaking me. In truth, I was giving him rope. When he left, folder clutched tightly under his arm, I went upstairs and opened Selene's drawer once more. The deed to Stonehaven glowed under the lamplight, untouched, untouchable. My heart steadied as I stared at it, hearing her voice again, "Wait for the right moment." I realized then that the moment was coming soon. Gabriel's arrogance was blinding him, leading him straight into the trap of his own making, and when the time came, I would no longer endure. I would strike. I waited until Gabriel was busy with his endless phone calls and legal maneuvering before I made my own quiet journey. The sun had barely risen when I drove out past the town, following the narrow winding roads that led to Stonehaven. The air grew cooler as the land opened into wide fields, and the trees arched above me like guardians keeping secrets. At last, the house came into view, standing proud at the edge of Eldermere, untouched by Gabriel's schemes, untouched by anyone but me and Selene. Stonehaven was not just a house, it was a testament. The dark stone walls rose tall against the sky, weathered but strong, like the two of us had once been. The windows caught the light of morning, glinting like watchful eyes. As I stepped out of the car, a hush settled around me. The world here was still, sacred, as if Selene herself lingered in the air. I unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside. The scent of cedar greeted me, faint but familiar. Selene had chosen every detail of this place with care. The polished wood floors, the deep hearth, the curtains she had sewn herself before she grew too weak. My fingers brushed across the mantel where she had once placed a vase of wildflowers, and I could almost hear her voice, soft and steady, reminding me to be patient, to trust the silence. I walked through each room slowly, as though reacquainting myself with an old friend. In the master bedroom, I paused by the window that overlooked the valley below. The view stretched wide and endless, hills rolling into the distance, untouched by the noise of the world. It was beautiful, it was safe, and it was mine. Standing there, I imagined Gabriel's face the moment he discovered this place. I pictured his confidence shattering, the certainty draining from his eyes as he realized that all his scheming, all his arrogance had been for nothing. The thought brought no smile to my lips, only a steady calm. This was not about vengeance alone. It was about justice, about honoring Selene's trust, about showing him that love cannot be reduced to figures in a ledger. I stayed for hours, letting the silence of Stonehaven settle into me like armor. By the time I locked the door and drove back toward Ravenbrook, my resolve was no longer fragile. It was steel. Gabriel believed he was closing in on victory. He had no idea that I carried Selene's secret like a sword beneath my coat, waiting for the moment to draw it. Gabriel's patience had withered into something sharper, something ugly. He no longer bothered with soft words or half-hearted reassurances. One afternoon he slammed his briefcase onto the kitchen table, his voice rising with the venom of someone convinced his generosity was being abused. "If you won't make the decision yourself, Dad, then I'll force it. You think the law will protect you? It won't. I'll file for power of attorney. I'll show them you're not fit to handle this anymore." His words struck like a whip, but I did not flinch. I sat in my chair, hands folded, eyes steady on him. His rage filled the room, echoing off the walls that had once held Selene's laughter, but I met it with silence. He mistook that silence for fear. He didn't realize it was preparati. On. He paced the kitchen like a predator in a cage, rattling off threats cloaked in legal jargon. He spoke of incompetence, of signatures I had given, of testimony he could gather from neighbors who thought I was too frail, too lost in memory. He didn't know that every word he threw at me only sharpened my resolve. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke, my voice calm, even. "You're willing to drag your own father into court to get what you want?" His jaw tightened. "I'm willing to do what's necessary. If you won't see reason, then I have no choice." No choice. The irony burned. He spoke of necessity as if greed were some noble duty. I leaned back in my chair, letting his anger roll past me like a storm I had weathered before. "Do what you think you must," I said quietly. He sneered, gathering his papers. "I'll make sure this ends my way. You'll see." When the door slammed behind him, the silence that followed was heavy, but it was not despair that filled me. It was clarity. Gabriel was blinded now, so certain of his victory that he could not see the ground shifting beneath his feet. He had already declared to the world that I was too weak, too old, too lost. He didn't know that Selene's secret waited in the shadows, untouched, unassailable. That evening, I pulled the envelope from the drawer once more. By the lamplight, I read the deed, every word steady on the page, every signature a shield that Gabriel could not break. Stonehaven was mine alone, immune to his threats, immune to his hunger. I placed the paper back carefully, locking the drawer with a final click. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. Not because the battle was over, but because I knew the war was already won. Gabriel thought his power came from papers and threats, from lawyers and signatures. My power came from Selene's foresight, from silence sharpened into a blade, from patience that outlasted storms. Soon, I would show him. Gabriel returned, not long after, more restless than ever, his voice sharp even before he stepped through the door. He didn't bother with greetings anymore. He barged into Ravenbrook as though it already belonged to him, dropping his coat onto the chair and slamming a stack of papers onto the table. His eyes burned with frustration, but beneath it all I saw something else, a flicker of desperation. "Enough, Dad," he snapped, his tone like ice breaking. "This has gone on too long. You're dragging everyone down with your stubbornness. Do you even understand what you're doing? Do you even care?" I sat quietly in the armchair, the one Selene used to favor, and studied him. He stood there shaking with anger, his voice rising, his words tumbling out in a storm of accusations. "I've sacrificed for this family. I've carried the weight when you couldn't, and now, when it's time for you to do something right, you sit there clinging to walls and memories like a coward." The word cut deep. Coward. I clenched my jaw, my hands gripping the arms of the chair until my knuckles whitened. My mind flew back to the years of sacrifice he had never seen. The sleepless nights, the endless work, the quiet tears I shed when no one was looking. I had given everything for him, for Selene, for the family. And here he stood, calling me a coward because I would not hand him the pieces of my life. I wanted to shout, to rise and tell him all the things he never knew, all the moments of pain and sacrifice that had built the ground beneath his feet, but I held the words in, letting them simmer like molten rock beneath the surface. My silence, I knew, was more dangerous than any outburst. "You're not listening," Gabriel roared. "You never have. Always so stubborn, always so sure you know better than everyone else. Well, look where that's gotten you. Alone, weak, out of touch with reality, and you'll drag us all into the grave with you if I let you." His words echoed through the room, heavy with venom. I met his gaze steadily, letting him see, not fear, but steel. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized there would be no peace in waiting, no reconciliation in silence alone. Gabriel had crossed the threshold. He had shown me the depths of his greed, the cruelty in his heart, the arrogance that blinded him to everything but himself. I breathed slowly, my voice low, controlled. "Be careful, Gabriel. You may find that the grave you're digging isn't mine." For the first time he faltered, his anger flickered, confusion cutting through the fire, but he recovered quickly, sneering, shaking his head as though dismissing me. "Empty words," he muttered, gathering his papers. But I knew better. They weren't empty. They were a promise that the reckoning was coming, and that when it arrived, Gabriel would learn the true cost of greed. The day of reckoning came not with shouts or slammed doors, but with a calmness so heavy it seemed to silence the very air. I had sent word for Gabriel and the others to come, telling them it was time to discuss the future of Ravenbrook. They arrived with hurried steps and greedy eyes, their whispers filling the halls like moths circling a flame. Gabriel led them, of course, swagger in his stride, folder tucked under his arm as though he were marching toward inevitable victory. We gathered in the living room, the same place Selene once filled with music and warmth. Now it felt colder, the air thick with tension. Gabriel stood at the center, his voice confident, rehearsed. "It's time to move forward," he declared. "Dad's agreed it's no longer practical to keep Ravenbrook. Once these documents are signed, the sale can proceed. We'll all benefit." Murmurs of approval rippled around the room, but I sat quietly in my chair, hands folded, eyes on Gabriel. He mistook my silence for surrender. He leaned toward me, sliding the papers across the table with a triumphant smile. "All we need is your signature." The room seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out the envelope Selene had left me. The old paper crackled as I laid it gently on the table, pushing it toward the center, where all could see. Gabriel frowned, irritation flickering across his face. "What's this, more delays?" I looked him square in the eye. My voice was calm, steady. "This is the truth you've been blind to, Gabriel." I opened the envelope and drew out the deed to Stonehaven, placing it atop his contracts. The bold letters and signatures glared up at him like a mirror of his own failure. The room fell silent as the others leaned in, their whispers dying on their lips. Gabriel snatched the paper, scanning it quickly, his confidence faltering with every line he read. His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without words. What is this?" "Your mother's foresight," I said evenly. "She left me Ravenbrook, yes, but she also left me Stonehaven, a second home, mine alone, untouchable. You thought you could strip me bare, reduce me to nothing, but you never saw the full picture. You never saw her love protecting me even from beyond the grave." Gasps filled the room. Cousins exchanged uneasy glances, their greedy dreams dissolving into smoke. Isolde looked up at me, her eyes wide with wonder, while Gabriel stood frozen, humiliation burning across his face. For the first time in weeks, I allowed a small smile to break across my lips. "You came here thinking you'd already won, but you never realized the game was mine from the start." Gabriel's hands trembled as he dropped the deed back onto the table. He had no words left, no defense. In that silence, his arrogance crumbled, and I saw not a victor but a boy stripped of his illusions, standing naked in the wreckage of his own greed. The silence after the reveal lingered like a storm that had just passed, heavy and uneasy. Gabriel stood pale and trembling, his eyes darting across the room, searching for allies among the faces that had once nodded along with his schemes. But the cousins, the relatives who had whispered about profit and practicality, now looked away from him. Their greed had dried up in the presence of truth. None of them wanted to be tied to his humiliation. He tried to speak, his voice cracking. "This doesn't change anything. We can still—" But no one listened. His words dissolved into the air, empty and brittle. The authority he had clung to so fiercely was gone. Without Ravenbrook in his grasp, without Stonehaven even in his imagination, he was nothing more than a son who had tried to betray his own father and failed. I sat quietly, watching him struggle, my hands steady on the arms of the chair. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to gloat. His humiliation was its own punishment, more searing than anything I could have said. At last, one of the cousins cleared his throat, muttering something about not being involved before shuffling toward the door. The others followed quickly, leaving Gabriel standing alone in the center of the room. His face twisted with fury and shame, but he said nothing more. He gathered his papers with shaking hands and stormed out, the sound of the door slamming echoing like the end of a chapter. The house grew quiet again. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, the weight of weeks of silence finally lifting from my chest. Across the room, Isolde climbed onto the arm of my chair, her small hand wrapping around mine. "Grandpa," she whispered, "does this mean the house is safe now?" I looked at her, at the innocence in her eyes, and felt something warm stir in me for the first time since Selene's funeral. "Yes, my dear," I said softly. "It's safe, and so are we." Her smile was the only light I needed in that moment. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, silently thanking Selene for guiding me, even after she was gone. As night fell, I walked through Ravenbrook, the air lighter than it had been in months. The shadows no longer pressed so heavy against the walls. Selene's presence lingered still, not as a haunting weight, but as a gentle hand at my back. Gabriel's betrayal had cut deep, but it had not broken me. Instead, it had revealed the strength she had left behind, the strength she had trusted me to use when the time came, and tonight I felt that strength like fire in my veins. The days after the confrontation felt strangely quiet, as if the walls of Ravenbrook themselves had exhaled in relief. For weeks the house had been suffocating beneath Gabriel's ambition. every corner filled with the echo of his demands. Now there was only peace. I walked through the room slowly, my hand brushing against the photographs, the worn banister, the curtains Selene had chosen long ago. For the first time since her funeral, I felt her presence not as a shadow, but as a warmth. She had trusted me with her secret, and I had kept it. Stonehaven was safe. Ravenbrook was safe. Her memory was safe. At night I sat in the armchair, the fire crackling low, and thought about everything that had passed. Betrayal, anger, silence, and at last, justice. Gabriel had tried to strip me of everything, blind to the sacrifices that had built his life. He had mistaken love for weakness, patience for surrender, but love had been my strength all along, and patience had been the blade I carried until the moment was right to strike. I thought of Selene, of her steady voice telling me to protect what mattered, even if it meant silence. She had known our son better than I had wanted to admit. She had seen the danger of his hunger and left me with the tools to withstand it. And though she was gone, I felt her hand guiding mine when I laid the deed to Stonehaven on the table, the moment that turned Gabriel's pride into dust. Gabriel did not return after that day. The others kept their distance too, their whispers silenced by the truth they had seen with their own eyes. Only Isolde visited, her laughter filling the house like sunlight breaking through clouds. She would sit with me, asking for stories of her grandmother, tracing the patterns on the rug with her small fingers. Through her, I saw the part of Selene that would never be lost. One evening, as the sun set over the fields beyond Ravenbrook, painting the sky in gold and crimson, I stood at the window and let the weight of it all wash over me. Grief and betrayal had threatened to crush me, but I had endured. Justice had not come with fury or vengeance, but with silence and truth, and in the end, that was enough. To those who hear my story, remember this: greed destroys itself, but love endures. Even when betrayed, even when pressed to the edge, hold to what matters. Protect it with silence if you must, and when the time is right, let the truth speak louder than any words. If my story has stirred something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to return. There are more truths, more reckonings waiting to be told.